So I'm going to dive straight into the lesson. I'm really excited about today because this is one of my favorite subjects, and I've actually got a really cool letter from Seneca to kind of get some little bits of wisdom from. But turning trials into triumphs. Oh, sorry. Just so you know, I'm gonna mute just anyone who is not. There we go. Yeah, so turning trials into triumphs. It's the cheesiest title that we've had so far, I will admit that. But I think that it's valuable nonetheless. There's so much good stuff that we can get from the Stoics that can help us to understand how we can transform the times in our lives that might be seen as the troughs, into times that can be of most benefit to us. And the Stoics really did have a lot to say about this sort of stuff, as you'll see today. But I guess the first thing that I wanted to mention, when we're looking at the whole spectrum of all of the terrible things that can happen to us in our lives and how we might react to those things, and how Stoicism can interact with those sorts of situations, it's really important to recognize, as we've heard from many people on the podcast, like Donald Robertson and Massimo Pigliucci, these people, Nancy Sherman, these people who are very much involved in the psychological side of Stoicism. Stoicism is a largely preventative philosophy and way of living, right? So I thought that we couldn't talk about dealing with trials and turning them into triumphs without first talking about how you might prepare yourself to deal with those trials, right? Because honestly, Stoicism is going to be not useless to you. It's going to be far less effective for you if you only use it in the times when you think that you need it, right? It's going to be most effective for you if you practice it diligently, even in times of peace, right? So even Seneca said, for example, we should be like the soldier who in times of peace, he's not just sitting there waiting for a war. He's rehearsing every single day. He's training his body, he's training his mind, he's training his shooting techniques. And, he's training himself so that when the war comes along, which it likely will, if you know anything about human history, then he's going to be prepared, right? And so that's the way of the Stoic. The way of the Stoic is one of being prepared for these trials so that when they come, we know that A, they were definitely going to come, and B, we can get the most out of them. So there are a few things that I wrote down in terms of how we can prepare for the trial. The first thing, the reason why I wanted to put this topic within the month of gratitude, where we're doing this gratitude challenge, is because I really think that gratitude, starting with gratitude, is such a great place. So I don't want to talk about that too much because we've already had that discussion. But, when it comes to preparing your mind to be able to look for the opportunities within the trials that you have, having an attitude of gratitude, a grateful mind, and always trying to look for the realistic, beautiful parts of life that are there if you will look for them, that's going to do you so much good when you get to, the stage where you have some sort of trial. I mean, just imagine that you're faced with some terrible calamity in your life, right? Do you want to face that trial with an attitude of being grateful for the things that you do have? Or do you want to face it with the very pessimistic view of life of, everything is bad, I'm not seeing any good in this, there's nothing good to take away from this? If you don't see the good in something, there is no good in something. That's the real beauty in what the Stoics taught us about how so much of what we see in life is our perceptions. So if you're not looking for something, you will not find it. That's just a fact. It's like, it's the classic idea of like, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? It's that exact same idea. So if you can gather a bit more of a realistic view towards life, that, hey, everything isn't so bad, there's also some really good stuff that I can take away in life, you will find those things. Now, I wanted to then discuss the idea of a few other things that we can do to kind of prepare ourselves to meet these challenges, many of which Seneca talks about. I love Seneca when he talks about this sort of stuff. It's so deep and it's so profound. But negative visualization. We've all heard about this idea of negative visualization, looking into the future and imagining all of the possible evils that could befall us, right? That's such an important psychological technique. And we know that it works, that we know as a fact that this premeditation simply works. They even did an experiment where I believe it was either with piano playing or with basketball or with both. But they got two groups to practice, right? One group rehearsed shooting the hoops physically, going there to the court and shooting hoops. The other one sat at home and visualized themselves rehearsing this, right? So they would literally just think about, okay, cool, I'm shooting it, it's going in, I'm shooting it, going in. And they actually found that both groups got very similar results when it came to testing them after they had rehearsed, right? And what this basically means is that what goes on in your mind will prepare you for whatever is going to come at you, like in real life, right? Now, he also talked about rehearsing adversity, right? So not only visualizing what could happen to you in the future, all of the terrible things that could happen, but rehearsing these things. So if you have a negative connotation towards having less money, or if you think that it's terrible that one day you might get into some position where you're in poverty, or somebody dies, or anything bad happens to you, try rehearsing that. I mean, don't go out and kill somebody just to rehearse somebody dying, but try to rehearse, the thing that could happen to you. For example, they said, go a week or go a few days living very scarcely, like wear the simplest clothes, eat the simplest foods, just so that you know that there's nothing evil about this. Now, I want to just dive into a few things that Seneca said here, because this all has to do with preparing yourself for the trial before it comes. Now, I just recently did an interview with a wonderful person called Rob. Oh, I cannot remember his name because we only just met the other day. I'm so sorry to this guy but he's going to be on the podcast this week. I'll release the episode. It's amazing. But anyway, he's an emergency ER doctor. And he said that one of the letters that really taught him about how to deal with extremely chaotic situations is letter 91, I believe it is, from Seneca. And I forgot about how good this letter is. And then I read it again and I was like, this is unbelievable stuff. There's no word is wasted in this letter, and it's massive, but I did cut it down a bit. But basically what he's talking about in this letter, he's talking to his friend Lucilius, and he's talking about another one of his friends who is completely distraught by the fact that his whole hometown of Lyons has just burned to the crisp, right? So this whole city has just had this massive fire, it's taken over, and there's nothing left, right? So Seneca is talking about basically what's going on with his friend who is now distraught, and about how maybe he would do well to prepare for these things in the future. Now, I just want to see, here we go. I'm just going to admit Ben here because I know that he is just a little bit late. Here we go. Hey Ben, how you doing? Welcome. So when it comes to this letter, this is so incredible. I'm going to read you a few things here. So the first thing that that really stood out to me that I think is so important that we understand when it comes to preparing our mind for these trials is something that Seneca points out here, that strangeness adds to the pain, right? So he says, strangeness adds to the weight of calamities. Every mortal feels the greater pain as a result of that which also brings surprise. Therefore, nothing ought to be unexpected by us. Our minds should be sent forward in advance to meet all problems, and we should consider not what is wont to happen, but what can happen. For what is there in existence that fortune, when she has so willed, does not drag down from the very height of its prosperity? And what is there that she does not more violently assail the more brilliantly it shines? I've got to stop there. So there's so much good stuff there. So basically, first, understand that if something is strange to you, it's going to be more of a surprise to you, and it's going to hurt you more if it comes along, right? Which it will, right? And also, uh, he says we shouldn't just expect the things that might happen. We should expect every possible thing that could happen to us, right? Because the fact of the universe is that everything that could possibly happen to you will likely happen to you, right? There's so much crap that can happen in this world. Like, who expected coronavirus? Like, yeah, Bill Gates came out and he was like, like, hey, I've been talking about this coming for a long time. There were probably a few experts that said, hey, it's going to be here, so we better prepare for this. But honestly, like 99.9% of the world had no idea that this was happening. And now we're all freaked out, right? Because we're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. What do you mean you can't believe this is happening? SARS, swine flu, Spanish influenza, the plague, like we've learned about this in history time and time and time again. Of course we knew this was going to happen. Like we had to know this was going to happen. We just didn't know the exact type of thing that was going to happen, right? So we need to really have this on our minds. And what I think I get most out of this passage is meditating on those things, that everything that could possibly happen. Now I'm actually, there's some really good stuff here as well. He says, she does not always attack. He's talking about fate. She does not always attack in one way or even with her full strength. At one time, she summons our own hands against us. At another time, content with her own powers, she makes use of no agent in devising perils for us. No time is exempt. In the midst of our very pleasures, there spring up the causes of suffering. So I think that last line is particularly important. It's in the midst of our pleasures that these sufferings actually pop up, right? It's when you least expect it. It's the time when you're enjoying life the most, when you absolutely don't think that anything could go wrong for you. That's when you need to be really careful, because you have to know that like those things don't last. And he talks more about this going on. So he says, nothing, whether public or private, is stable. The destinies of men, no less than those of cities, are in a whirl. Amid the greatest calm, terror arises, and though no external agencies stir up commotion, yet evils burst forth from sources whence they were least expected. So it's that same idea. It's when you least expect it, right? That's when it's going to hit you. And if you least expect it, it's going to hit you so much harder because it's a surprise to you. Sorry, there's so much good stuff in this letter. I'm going to have to read it to you. So he says, let us place before our eyes in its entirety the nature of man's lot. And if we would not be overwhelmed or even dazed by those unwanted evils, as if they were novel, let us summon our minds beforehand, not as great an evil as oftentimes happens, but the very greatest evil that possibly can happen. So again, he's just talking about like, actually what's really cool here is this absolutely goes into the realm of aligning with nature, because what Seneca is really good at doing, he's really good at learning the laws of the universe that simply repeat themselves over and over again, right? And that's really important. Like it's such an important aspect of Stoicism, not simply to believe that you can get all of your information just within your own mind or from books. It's right. You can get the most helpful information for you by looking at history, by looking at repetitions within nature, by looking at all of these things that tend to happen that are just natural laws that we can see repeated over time and time again. I mean, if you want to have the discussion even about ancient stories, like I don't necessarily believe in the theological or in the God of the Bible, right? But in terms of the repetition of history that is taught in the Bible, the time and time again, cities and nations being crushed and again, it's like those ancient stories are telling us something about the nature of humanity and about the nature of the world, right? And it's the same here. He's telling us this thing, it repeats itself. Yeah, and this is one thing. He said they stand to fall. This doom awaits them, one and all. It might be that some internal force or blast of... Actually, I'm not going to read all of that because there's so much, but that one line there, it stands to fall. That reminds me so much of the Taoist ideas and the Eastern philosophical ideas that everything in life is in a flux, right? Everything is yin and yang, up and down, constantly, right? So your life will not simply just be good all the time. Like, that's impossible, because nothing in nature, the world, your life, humanity, nothing exists permanently for good. And he actually says in here, like, the bigger the thing is, the more likely it is to fall. It's like, look at a tree, right? The taller a tree gets and the older it gets, what does that also make it? More likely to fall, because the older a tree gets, it's getting closer to it. And it's like, the older you get, the more likely you are to die. Or, it's like there's so much that you can learn simply by observing nature and the patterns in nature. And this idea that things stand to fall is the same idea that, you cannot have something without the space that creates the something. You cannot have the teeth on a saw without having the space in between the teeth. Everything must exist with a perfect balance. Now, one other thing that I'm going to jump into here. Okay, this is cool. Yeah, actually, this is a great passage I want to read you. Into such a world we have entered. Under such laws do we live. If you like it, obey. If not, depart whithersoever you wish. Cry out in anger if any unfair measures are taken with reference to you individually. But if it is inevitable, this law is biting upon the highest and the lowest alike, be reconciled to fate, by which all things are dissolved. That's such a brilliant passage. It's like, listen, this is the world you live in. Crap things will happen to you all the time. That's simply the law of the universe. Good doesn't simply happen all the time, right? So either you're going to accept those laws and you're going to live peacefully with those laws, or you're going to be constantly kicking against the grain for the rest of your life and constantly be unhappy because these things are happening to you. So why don't you just leave? It's like you know that these are the laws of the universe. So you have a choice. You either stick here and you obey these laws, or you choose to, get out of the game. It's like, the rules of the game, so follow them. Now, I think that there's only a couple passages that I wanted to read from this now. This is great. Cool. So the only other thing that I wanted to mention there, in terms of preparing yourself before the trial happens, is become a student of history. Become a keen observer, not only of history as well, but of the way that the world works. That's so important. And I've seriously been thinking about this lately, because the Taoists talked about it, the Bible talks about it, the Stoics talked about it, Buddhism talks about it. All of these ancient, like Hinduism, everything, like they all talk about these ancient ideas of, here are the natural laws that we're living in, right? Here are the processes by which the world works. So align with those processes, and maybe, oh, there we go. I'm just going to add Ben back in. And maybe if you align with them, you're going to be happier, right? And if you become a student of history, you will understand these patterns, because even in the last 100 years, look at all of the, maybe 120, look at all of the crap that has happened in the world in the last 120 years. You've got World War I, you've got World War II, you've got Vietnam, you've got, the Korean War, you've got genocide on every level. You've got all of these different horrifying events that have happened in the last 120 years. How could you possibly think that in your short lifetime of, 50 to 80 years or 90 years, how do you think that you're not going to see a time like that in your life, right? And instead of freaking you out, that should actually give you a peace of mind. That should give you a calmness for yourself, because you know that when this thing comes, you're not going to be kicking against the grain, and you're not going to be the person who's freaking out. You're going to be the person who says, yeah, I knew this was coming. I didn't know this specific example of what was coming, but I knew that in general, we were going to deal with something like this. It was always going to come. And also, if you know what happens, then you can also maybe see some patterns and some signs that things are coming, right? All right, so now we get to the thing happening, right? Your whole city's just burnt down like lions, or, you know, hey, we're dealing with coronavirus, or you've got a death in the family, or something happens to you that you just wish didn't happen, right? Then we come into the territory of making sure that your mindset towards life is that things are happening for you and not to you, right? And I kind of strike a balance between these things, because obviously some things that happen to you are just so bad that, like, listen, as much as you want to get something good out of it, sometimes you just need to say, life sucks, I'm going to move on, right? Like sometimes you just need to be like, that was just, I wish that didn't happen, and there's probably nothing that I can really take away from it, but I'm just going to move on. But if you look for the good things that you can take out of certain situations, you can get the most out of it. And so Seneca says here, perhaps its destruction has been brought about only that it may be raised up again to a better destiny. Oftentimes a reverse has but made room for more prosperous fortune. Many structures have fallen only to give rise to a greater height. So what he's saying here is he's completely reframing the destruction of this city. He's saying, listen, it's terrible what happened. Nobody likes it. However, look to nature and you'll see that a lot of times something is destructed, something has fallen or has undergone some sort of massive transformation only to become stronger, only to become better, right? We see this, for example, in forest fires. So one of the big debates that happened over here in Australia in the recent fires that we had, because most of you will know that, like, so much, like there was so much fire over here and just burning thousands and millions of hectares of forestry. One of the big debates that was happening was, why haven't we been burning our forests more often? Because one of the things you need to know about the types of forests that we have over here in Australia especially is that they actually require burning. They need to be burnt every so often, because what happens is the trees grow, their leaves fall to the ground, their sticks fall to the ground, and there's all of this rubble on the ground, right? Now, if that doesn't get burnt every so often, then it just keeps on building up and building up. And if it builds up too much and then a fire comes through, the fire doesn't rejuvenate the forest. It actually gets so hot that it burns and ruins the forest and kills everything, right? So we need to be doing burning in our forests so that it gets rid of all of the crap on the bottom of the forest floor and actually leaves room for more growth. And so what you've seen over here is that some forests that have never been burnt, right? Even like they had fires so hot that it just completely just devoured the forest and it will never be the same again, right? So that's a classic example of how some things, even in nature, when you've undergone this trial, when something terrible happens, it could be the case that if you look at it in the right way, you can actually turn it into a benefit for yourself. It can make you stronger. It can make you a better person. And then the only last thing that I wanted to read from Seneca here, this is actually brilliant. So yeah, we've talked about, you know, making sure that you're looking at things, trying to get the opportunities out. And we also talked about that last week. But he says here, it is only by common opinion that there is anything formidable in them. Your fearing death is therefore like your fear of gossip. But what is more foolish than a man afraid of words, right? So essentially what he's saying here is that so many of the things that we fear are simply things that we fear because the public fears them. And this is the mixture between nature and culture and philosophy, right? So there are certain elements of your fears that are simply biological inside you, right? Like it might be, say, like, I don't know, like a snake, right? Like historically, humans are pretty scared of snakes. And so if you're walking through a forest and a snake jumps out at you, you're going to jump, right? And that's not going to be your conscious decision. That's going to be your basically your biological instinctual response to jump at that snake. Then you have culture, which teaches us to fear even more things, right? So, you know, based on your different cultures from around the world, this might be an interesting discussion to have after this. You will all have things that your culture has taught you to fear that just by other people's words, you have this stigma in your mind that I should not want this. For example, death. Like the Stoics talk so much about this meditation on why are we afraid of death? There's absolutely no logical reason to be afraid of something that, A, when you're dead, you don't know, or you might know and you'll be in a good place, in which case, great, or you might know and you'll be in a bad place, in which case you still can't do anything about it. It's like we've been conditioned to be so afraid of death, right? And that's a cultural thing that has just been, kind of pushed throughout the ages. And then you kind of have your philosophy, and that's where you come in. You can come in and say, okay, nature gives me this, culture has taught me this, but my philosophy allows me to change the way that I see the world and to change the way that I see these things that everybody else around me is afraid of. And so there's got to be a lot of room there for allowing your mind to rationalize through things and say, hang on, am I really afraid of this? Or is my mum afraid of this? Or is my wife afraid of this? Or is my culture afraid of this? And I find that it's so helpful to do that, because then you start to become an observer and you're not simply a player in the game. Okay, cool. So yeah, in terms of when the trial happens, be looking for the opportunities. Be looking for the ways that it might simply just be by common opinion that you are afraid of this thing. The next one that I want to talk about, something that has always helped me in times of trial, has been doing a dichotomy of control analysis. Now, I know I talked about this last week, but very simply, this is all I do. I sit down, I get a piece of paper, and I write down, on one side, I write down all of the things that I can do to make the situation better. Things that I definitely can do. I'm talking like, today, I can get this done today, and this will improve the situation. And then on the other side, I write all of the things that I definitely cannot control about the situation. Now, when you do this, you can basically rip off that other side and chuck it away, because you don't need to think about that anymore. All you need to think about is the stuff that you can actually do. And seriously, I've done this many times in my life when things have happened that have been contrary to what I would have liked to have happened. And it works every time. Like, there's a peace of mind. It immediately gets me results because I start to work and get things done. And that actually moves to my kind of last point here. Something that I really think is important to understand when we get into these difficult situations is, I go to the idea that Seneca taught, that if you don't know which port you're sailing to, then no wind is favorable. Your mind gets so cluttered when you're dealing with catastrophe. When you're dealing with anything that is remotely, you're remotely afraid of, or you wish hadn't happened, your mind starts coming up with all these, I wish this didn't happen. Why did it happen? What happened? What can I do about it? And you just get so cluttered, right? And you might find yourself, like I have in my life a couple of times, just getting to the end of my day and thinking, what did I do today? Nothing happened. I didn't do anything productive, because my mind was just going over and over and over all of these different possibilities, all these options, all these directions. So my suggestion here is get clear in your mind, get really clear in your mind. You could do meditation. You could just unload all of your thoughts onto a piece of paper, just write out everything that you're thinking, right? And plan. For me, the biggest thing is planning. For example, I'll tell you guys this. Last week, I had a day where I was kind of like, what did I do today? I wish I had been more productive. I wish I had have done something a little bit better with my day. I did some good stuff, but I was just like, that's not the kind of day that I want to have over and over again. And if I don't want to have it, then I need to do something different. So I said, cool, what's happening? What's happening is my mind is too cluttered. There's too much going on. I don't have a clear direction with what I'm wanting to get out of these days. So all I did is I literally just wrote down Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, right? And I wrote down, on these days, these are the things that I would like to achieve, right? It's that simple. The idea of like, write down your goals and it will make you more likely to achieve them, 100% true. It's scientific fact now. Like, they've done studies that show that it literally increases your chances of achieving those goals. So for me, I just said, the reason I'm in this kind of funk is because I don't have a clear objective in my mind. It's because there's too many directions, there's too many things going on. So when you're dealing with something like that, write your thoughts down, or do a quick plan. Write down like, hey, this is what I would like to achieve. This was what would be good for me. You'll immediately get some clarity. You'll get a calmness about you, and you'll also have a direction to move. So I think in general, those are the main points that I wanted to discuss in terms of both the preparation before the trials happen, and also I guess dealing with them when they've happened.
Hi there. If you enjoyed that lesson, make sure you head to my Patreon site, patreon.com/Simon J. E. Drew, and sign up there so that you can join in the discussion every single week at our Practical Stoic meetups. I'd love to see you there. I'd love to hear your experiences as well, and hopefully we'll see you soon.